Are you looking for more out of your life? Do you need ideas on how to start new businesses and how to move forward in your own personal life? Well, guess what? You have come to the right radio show. At You Can Overcome Anything podcast show, you will learn and hear from many people from all walks of life who are sharing their challenges, their stories, the habits, and the mind shifts they had to overcome to become who they are today. On top, you will get a chance to connect and see how you can overcome anything by networking and learning about your next move through this radio show. I present to you our great speakers at You Can Overcome Anything podcast show with your host, CesarRespino. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. It is your host, CesarRespino, and you can find me at www.CesarRespino.com. Today, I have a special guest. His name is Ray Hollister. Hey, Ray, how are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing great. Well, let me give the listeners a little bit about your background, and then we can really dive into it because you definitely know your story better than I do. But nevertheless, I want to kind of start with this, that you've gone through total paralysis, and you pretty much broke your neck in your 7 vertebrae, and you were paralyzed from the neck down, and you've been recovering from that, and now you're fully mobile, right? I definitely want to tap in to understand what that happened, how that happened. But before that, maybe give us a little bit about who is Ray, your upbringing, where are you originally from, and how was your childhood?
Well, grew up in Carefree, Arizona. Kind of moved all over the place until about the age of 8 when they discovered that I had really bad asthma. So they moved to Arizona because of my asthma. And that's where I ended up growing up, was in Arizona. And professional background, I spent a number of years in counterintelligence with the government. It started in the Navy and moved forward, and currently with the Department of Homeland Security. And the totality of what we're going to talk about today occurred in the very beginning of my intelligence training back when I was in the Navy.
Awesome. So let's talk about what happened. What was that one, what I always called, turning point? Could have been your turning point in your life. Not sure. And we can definitely talk about that. Nevertheless, a lot of times when people go through some sort of pain, a purpose is born, right? So let's talk about you breaking down your neck, and how did that take place, or what was the aspect there?
Well, I completely agree. There are definitely elements in your life that occur that are absolute turning points. That's a really good way to frame that. And I think that many can occur throughout your lifetime, but this absolutely was a massive one that shaped my life going forward. So I was very young. I was 19, in the mode, having been through just the hardest part of the intelligence training. I had this really high vaulted view of myself. I really would not characterize myself as a good person at that point. I thought I was the new James Bond. Women were on the planet for my personal pleasure. Kids were a nuisance. That just a really big-headed, obnoxious view of myself. And it was at this time that I wanted to go and visit my cousin, because she had a friend who I thought was really hot, and I wanted to go, show off. That's the truth, and that's the bottom line. So I went up there, picked them up. They agreed we were going to go out. We were going to go roller skating up in Tunkhannock, which is in New York, and got into a car accident. The gist of the car accident is pretty simple. An animal popped up in the road, and I thought it was a deer, swerved the wrong direction. To the left was a wide open cornfield, and to the right was a little cliff. And I went the wrong way. Turned out later that it was a goat. Not important, but I think it's kind of funny that I saved a goat. But the car in the accident, the way that the car hit several times on the way down in the mode of the accident, what ended up happening is I fractured, broke, or subluxed all 7 of my vertebrae in my neck.
Mm.
And then the spinal cord was severely damaged. So the genesis of the accident was profoundly stupid. I was being an ass. There's no nice way to put it. It was just profoundly stupid. The actual accident itself, what makes the story a bit profound, and I'm sure you'll have questions going into it later, and this is where the turning point comes, is much later. But the accident as it occurred, all 7 vertebrae and spinal cord that was crushed and cut and just really bad damage, was not diagnosed in the first hospital. It was a very small little hospital, country hospital. And so the bottom line is they misdiagnosed me and they released me. Now, I don't have an explanation that science can use. Science can't explain why I wasn't dead, and they can't explain why I had mobility. Other than it is clear that I had 7 broken vertebrae, severely damaged spinal cord, and was misdiagnosed in the first hospital, and they released me. And then I went on down to Philadelphia, where I had to get seen by a Navy doctor, because when you're military, you can't be seen in a civilian hospital without being seen by military doctors, and that's standard practice. And it was at that doctor's appointment, and then at that time, where they discovered the problem. And the way it was discovered, which is part of the story of the death of Harold, was pretty wild. He wanted to do an extension and flexion exercise, which I didn't know what that was. So he told me that he was going to bend my head forward and back and from side to side. Now, he didn't know, and I didn't know, that I had the broken neck and the spinal cord damage. And so when he bent my head forward, I collapsed and went into a coma. And so that's the foundation, the beginning of where the real horror began, because it was at that point that they rushed me to a hospital to have emergency surgery to save my life and stabilize me, and then move on to other surgeries. But that was the accident. It was just simply a car accident, because I wasn't being smart.
Wow, I gotta tell you, that is crazy. And were you during that time under the influence, or it was just being a kid kind of thing?
Yeah, I was just being a really stupid young man who thought that the world was his to conquer.
Yeah.
So no, there was no influence. There was no alcohol, no drugs involved. Just me being an ass trying to prove myself to this girl so that I could, get a little fun.
Right. And so, it's interesting. And the reason why I ask if there was any kind of influence, because at the end of the day, like, it's crazy how at a blink of an eye, your entire world can change. And sometimes I believe we don't see that. We don't understand that. Sometimes we take that for granted. So was there any, with the fact that there was an accident that, it could have been a very simple accident where this was definitely much bigger than a simple accident. Was there at any given point a realization for you now or then where, like, wow, I was so near death that I escaped that, but there must have been a lesson there within that aspect, besides, trying to impress the girl. I mean, you were pretty much facing death in the blink of an eye, right?
Well, I didn't know that at the time, and that's where the process of the death of Harold comes, because this was not an issue I knew. In that first hospital, I was misdiagnosed. He took X-rays, and I don't want to speak ill of the doctor. He has since voluntarily gave up his license and retired. But the bottom line is, they took the X-rays. They did all the things they were supposed to do. He missed it, flat out missed it. Diagnosed me with a possible shoulder injury and a possible concussion. Now, I needed over 60 stitches in my scalp, internal and external. That should have been a definite concussion, at the very least probable, but possible. And so it was just a misdiagnosis. So the accident, unfortunately for me, the lesson that I had to learn had to come after I came out of the coma. I didn't have a big lesson from that accident, other than it was embarrassing that my intention to impress this girl went wildly wrong, and it was embarrassing. I still hadn't come to, you've heard the term the come to Jesus moment. I hadn't had that yet, because I hadn't felt the totality of the near death. I didn't know that my neck was broken. So, maybe, none of us in the vehicle died. There were some serious injuries, but at the time, mine weren't the serious injuries, because I, again, misdiagnosed. So that aspect came later.
Right. Yeah. So once that came about, and you realize that you're paralyzed, or you actually is a lot worse than what you were told the first time. How was that recovery, right? I mean, I think that that's probably a shock. That's also a realization. I don't know if you went into depression. I can already see people in that state of mind going into depression, because a lot of times anything that we go through life, no matter how hard it might be, whether it is the loss of a loved one or a terminal illness or something to that nature, uh, all of that is not a good thing. Yet you can definitely battle through that, or go through it by having a positive state of mind, and or by having a strong state of mind, right? And not falling into depression, or not falling into the victim role, or not falling into anything that is going to deprive you from what is your true future to be, right? What was it for you?
Yep, you've nailed it. That was very well said. I'll give you a little tidbit of what's in the death of Harold, because what led up to it is pretty remarkable in its totality. So when I came out of the coma, I still did not know what was wrong, because again, when he bent my neck forward, he didn't know and I didn't know that there was any spinal injury. So I went to coma. I have no memory of that. I have no memory of all of that information from the time of the accident until roughly 2 weeks after I come out of the coma. I have no memory. This is all rebuilt from people that I've talked to and the doctors. So what had occurred is, when I came out of the memory, our best guess with psychiatrists and psychologists is that I had training. And so I had ideas and what I needed to do for myself to survive, because here I wake up and the reality and the literal story is that I was strapped into what's called a striker frame. And a striker frame is just simply a bed where you're strapped down. And in spinal cord injuries, it's common that you might convulse or there might be things going on. So they keep you strapped down to prevent further injury to yourself. When I woke up, I didn't know that I had a broken neck. I didn't know that I had a spinal cord injury, and I didn't know that any of this had happened. I didn't have any memory of an accident. I invented in my head that I'd been captured. Now, this was ridiculous and silly. If I'd been captured, one, what's the likelihood they were speaking English? But they were all treating me like, giving me the name like this kid was amazing. Miracle Kid was constantly used. And it was all because I managed to do something that I shouldn't have been able to do on the operating table, which was breathe on my own. The level of injury at the C1 level, and where the spinal cord was damaged, should have knocked out my ability to breathe on my own. So I should have needed help with all of that. At some point, somehow, some way, they figured out that I didn't need it and I was breathing on my own. And they started calling it Miracle Kid. At this point, I still wasn't moving. They had the assumption that I was totally paralyzed. But when I came out of the coma, I assumed that I was captured, and I invented this great story in my head of what must have happened. As the only thing that they could do from me kicking their ass was to strap me in. This is the kind of thing that I had to think of and create in my mind. Now, for you and for those that are listening, one of the things about me that's kind of important to know, so that you understand why this transformation was so powerful, is that I have a phobia of needles. And just an abject phobia, like how some people see a snake and they pass out. I'm that way with needles. Don't do too good with blood either. And so there was a moment when a nurse was coming in to give me my morphine shot for the pain. Now, at the time, it was basically in a shunt down by my hip. I didn't know that. All I saw was a nurse that came out with a needle that to me appeared to be about 8 feet long. And she's ready to stab me with this thing. And I went into panic mode. And I told her flat out, if you stab me with that, I'm going to kick you in the face. And the nurse thought that I had a great sense of humor. She really thought, what a great sense of, here's this guy totally paralyzed. Still nobody's told me this, but totally paralyzed. This guy, what a great sense of humor, is going to kick me. And she laughed as she came at me with the needle. And I panicked. So in my head, I kicked her as hard as I could. But what I did in reality was I moved my hip out of the way, because that's where her needle was going. Now, that wasn't possible, not medically. I shouldn't have been able to move anything, but much less move my hip out of the way. And now I'm going to tell you how I remember it, but I'm also fairly confident that this is not what actually happened, because again, with phobias, part of what phobia is. You really create something massive that's not there.
Mm.
But my memory is this woman screamed, dropped the needle, and ran away. So I succeeded. The reality is probably much more like she got that, wait, that's not possible, and went to got the doctor. But my memory is she screamed, I won, but then the doctor comes in and he says the same thing. He says, I tried to kick my nurse, so you need to get this. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to kick you right square in the nuts. You come anywhere near me with that needle. And he did the same thing. He went to where the little shunt was. And again, in my mind, I aimed and I tried to kick and I moved my hip out of the way. In reality, I just moved my hip out of the way. But in my mind, I was kicking him. And the doctor's reaction was, huh. And then he walked out. Now, nobody told me that I was paralyzed. Nobody told me what was going on other than they knew what should have happened. Within 30 minutes, there was a whole new team coming in of rehabilitation therapists and specialists coming in, and they were getting me back in. Now, I don't know if it was deliberate. I am grateful that they didn't tell me, to be very honest. But this is where the first transformation came, because I did not know what the severity was. All I knew is that now I have rehabilitation therapists come in and they're going to let me walk now. So they take off the bandages and whatnot, and they want to get me into mobility mode. And so I spent the next couple of weeks getting back into mobility mode, where I went from having to use a walker to then having to use 2 canes to then just having one available should I need it to lean on. And it was at this point that I was approached by the surgeon that initially saved my life and stabilized me. And he was absolutely stunned and flabbergasted that there I was walking in the hallway with little to no effort. And this surgeon said, and this part is seared in my brain, this surgeon looked me eye with a great big smile and enthusiasm, said, "This is amazing. I've never had a patient with a neck as severely broken as yours who lived, much less walked." And the moment he said broken neck, I mean, the instant, the right side of my body completely shut down. It was so bad that even my face slid because there was just nothing. It's exactly the same as what you see in stroke victims, except most of them, it happens on the left side. And in this case, for me, it was the right side. And then once again, now I was paralyzed again, but this time it was right down the middle from top to bottom on the right side. And that was the beginning of the second birth, if you will, because I collapsed. And when I came to a little bit later, I had no motion, absolutely nothing. I couldn't feel anything. It was completely dead. You could do whatever you want, punch, poke, saw it off. I wouldn't have known. And I absolutely went into a complete and utter depression at that point, just exactly like what you were mentioning. This was the point where the reality hit me. Now, it was later on that the major transformation came, but it was the depression that set in here. And I was suicidal. I was absolutely despondent. And it was built on, and it made it worse by the fact that I thought that in my head, I had created this superhero image of myself, this James Bond, untouchable, that now I had lost all of that identity. It was just absolutely taken from me and crushed. And it felt unfair. And rather than, looking at the reality, rather than looking at what was going on, I internalized that as being totally unfair. You talk about a loss of faith of all kinds. I mean, what faith I did have, no God could do this. Why would they do that? I mean, everything collapsed in on me. And that I went into an extraordinarily deep depression and suicidal all at the same time. I laugh. It's not a laughing matter, but I have to laugh now only because I look at how pathetic it was at the time. But my attempt at suicide, I was such a chicken of blood that my attempt at suicide was to take a dull plastic knife and try to scrape up my arm, thinking that maybe that would do it. Because I couldn't feel anything, but I was so afraid I might see blood, I refused to cut because I can't move. All I can move is my left arm, and I'm not left-handed. So I'm taking it and I'm just scraping up and down. And when I realized that had absolutely no effect, the next thing I wanted to do was I wanted to throw myself off the bed because I had a halo traction unit on. The halo traction unit is something they screw into your head. It bolted straight to your skull. And so I thought that if I could throw myself off the bed, that that thing would puncture my brain and there it would go and I'd be gone. But unfortunately, when you're paralyzed on one half of your body, you can't get enough motion or momentum to move one way or the other. I mean, that was a lot of weight to try to pull with muscles that had been not in use in a long time. So as suicidal as I was, I had no way to affect it. And it was the deepest, darkest time that I had. If you have another question going in there, and if I mean, I can pause here, and if not, then I can move forward to where the transformation came.
Yeah, well, I guess there's two things that you said that I think are very profound and so important, right, and critical to an extent. And it doesn't matter how you see it or what's your situation. The fact that you were given those news of, hey, you're paralyzed, and then your unconscious mind, or your mind, in this case, I think it was the unconscious mind, kind of went ahead and just shut down. That's very similar to what people sometimes do in life, right? In anything that we do. And I think it's a very good lesson to learn and to listen to. Yet sometimes we're so afraid of the unknown that we also allow the fear to take away the opportunity, right? And so because of that fear of whatever that might be going through, we're afraid of taking that opportunity. Or sometimes we are so afraid of being comfortable with the uncomfortable, and therefore we don't take action, right? So that was one thing that kind of resonated with me when you were telling me that story, because that mechanism, that wall came up and said, hey, no, like, we're gonna shut down right now because we're afraid of that, whatever that might be going on. The second thing is that sometimes, even through our journey, even through whether you're working a 9-to-5, a relationship, or you might be having some difficult times, or you're an entrepreneur, whatever the case may be, we lose faith, we lose that hope, we lose that because we don't see the results that we're hoping to get, and we go into this deep state of depression, or idea of, I'm a failure. It doesn't matter what I do, I'm not gonna be able to get ahead, and that's kind of like, again, those things came out of your story, which again, we as people go through it at different intervals or in different aspects of our lives. Nevertheless, they're very vivid to each one of us, right? We'll all see it differently, and we'll deal with it differently. So I want to definitely hear about the transformation. What got you out of that state of mind? I mean, losing faith, going through all of that, multiple attempts of suicide and all that stuff, and still say, you know what, I'm here standing, because there must have been something that, clicked in your head and said, you know what, we got to change this narrative.
And that's exactly what happened right afterwards. Being in that state, and I know that you've seen, and we've all seen somebody where we get really concerned because you can tell they've given up, they're just done, and you can tell that, and our heart aches for them and breaks for people when we see that. And that is the place where I was absolutely despondent and had no interest in anything. I was already not what I would characterize a good person, because I viewed everything as owed to me. And then you take that and you take all of that away from me. Now I'm just this despondent, suicidal jerk that doesn't want to hear anything from anybody. And at one point, I had the priest, it was at the Philadelphia Naval Hospital, the priest that serviced the area had come in. And he said, this is really interesting. I'm going to talk to you for a minute. And I told him what I thought, told him where he could go. And he laughed at me. He said, well, if you can push me out, I'll go. And that really offended me. I mean, it deeply offended me. I started you so-and-so, and who do you think you are? And he said, look, stop. Now, my first name is Harold. So, I mean, that's the whole point of Death of Harold, is that, my first name is Harold. He said, look, Harold, just listen for a minute. I don't need your feedback. I don't need you to answer. I just want you to hear something, because you're actually quite remarkable if you would just open your mind. I want you to think about something. Are you willing to admit that you don't control the universe? And I said some very ugly, choice words to him at that point. I told him what he could go do with himself. And he looked at me and said, so, all right, I guess I confused you, because I said I didn't need your answer. You can answer this. do you think you control the universe? And I said, fine, look, if it'll get you out of here, no, I don't control. Obviously, I don't control the universe. At the time, I didn't say it with two hands. I said it with one. I was mad. He said, okay, fine. Is it possible, just possible, that there's an intelligent design, that maybe something is in control? Now, I am being candid here. I wanted him to leave. Mm-hmm. So I said, sure, there's a possibility. Now, the honest truth for me at that time is that I didn't care. I wanted him gone, so I was willing to say what he wanted to hear. I said, yeah, sure, there's a chance. And at this moment, this was the beginning of the transformation, because I promise you, what I remember, it seemed like the light suddenly dimmed. This priest's voice dropped like 3 octaves, and he said, then let's call that force God. And just, it was the way he said it. It was with certainty, it was with power, and it was an exact moment where I was enraptured, because let's call this power God. He said, I'm going to ask you a question. What if it's God's will that you never walk again? What are you going to do about it? And I was just stared at him. That was such a profound thought. What if it's God's will? What if it's God's will I never walk again? But before I could get too deep into it, he said, wait a minute. What if it's God's will that you get up out of that bed and walk out of the hospital? What are you going to do about it? And he said, well, hey, it was good talking to you. I have other people I need to see, and I'll catch you later. And the guy got up and walked out. And I was left just absolutely stunned. For the first time anywhere, somebody had a conversation with me that did not end with get used to it, or this is your life, or you'll never walk again. Somebody ended the conversation giving me an option. Maybe this could be taken off my shoulders. Maybe everything wasn't on me. And so just maybe, if I were willing to renew my faith, what if it was God's will I walked again? There's nothing I can do about it. If God wants me to walk, I'm going to walk. And it really got me thinking. It was a moment of absolute clarity from a moment of despondency. It was that moment that took me out of despondency that gave me a little bit of hope. Within an hour, the staff psychiatrist had come in, and he was talking to me. And this time, I wasn't in that angry state. And I was actually glad to see somebody. I had kind of wanted to talk about what just happened. But he sat down and he said, look, I got to go over something with you, because this is really exciting. You're kind of like this perfect test case. In the field of psychiatry, you probably don't know this, but in the field of psychiatry, the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body, and the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. Now, people are willing and understanding to know that the right side of your brain, that controls the left side of your body, this is the logical side. This is this is the gifted side. This is the musical side. This is the fun side. And then there's the left side of your brain that controls the right side of your body. And the left side of your brain is the logical side, the numerical, the math side, if you will. It's on facts, where your other is like fun and possibility and potential. And we think it's fascinating because you're paralyzed on the right side of your body, and you were told by an expert that you were dead. You don't find this interesting? This fascinates me. I really want to dive into this and figure it out, because you know what I think happened to you, Harold? I think that what happened is that you got this devastating news that you were dead, and the right side of your brain, that, the fun side, the exciting side, the possibility side said, oh, come on, moron, you've been walking for 6 weeks. But the left side of your brain said, this man's an expert, you are dead, and the right side of your body just shut down. It died. He said, that's fascinating. It is incredible. Anyway, I got to go. I got other people to see. And this guy gets up and leaves.
Wow.
So now, in the span of less than 2 hours, I've had 2 conversations that did not end with "you'll never walk again," both giving me external data that lifted my spirits and gave me the option that maybe it's not all about me. Now, in addition to the phobia of needles, the other thing that's important to know about me is I'm a voracious reader. Absolutely love reading. And I'm constantly reading about all kinds of things. I really enjoy it. And I had a book of quotations by Winston Churchill that was there. It was after the priest visit and the psychiatrist visit that I began to really get involved in what I should have been doing with physical therapy. Now, in my bed, there had a little trapeze hanging up, but what I was supposed to be doing was putting my hand on the trapeze and trying to grip. And so I could do this on my own. I didn't have to have a therapist, but I refused. But after these two, I began to do what I should have been doing. I would take my left hand, I'd grab my right, and I'd put it up on the trapeze, and I would try to grip. And I did that over and over and over and over. And in the span of less than a day, I was able to take my hand, put it on there, and hold on to the trapeze. And then from that point, it took about 8 weeks, and I was finally able to get my mobility back. I only got it to 80%. That's not a complaint. That was the reality, but I got it to 80%. But that 80% was the milestone because that's when they could release me. So the transformation that was huge occurred at the point of my release. During the time of that recovery, when I was getting to the 80%, the only people or creatures that treated me like I was human, like I was cool, were children and dogs. Now, I previously couldn't care less about dogs. They were okay, but children were definitely in my way. But the two things that treated me like I was gold were children, because they thought the halo was cool. They thought it was the coolest thing ever that it was screwed to my skull, and they all wanted to touch it. It was just, so children became an extraordinarily powerful part of my life because I enjoyed seeing them. Every time I saw one, I would deliberately make my way towards them because I knew inevitably they would think that was really cool. It was screwed into my head. And also they had the therapy animals that are now available. At the time, it was just the dogs, and they were so calming. And they didn't care that I had things stuck in my head. They didn't care if I could only move one arm or no arms or paralyzed. And so it was that understanding that I could find kids and they would think I was cool. It really began to help build me back up. Then it came time to be released from the hospital. And I was all excited. I thought, okay, I get to be released. But when the nurse came to the area where I was being housed with the other patients, I was ready to go out. I didn't need a walker. I didn't need a cane or anything. I was all at 80%. I was ready to go. I even got dressed. I had all my stuff. And she had a wheelchair. And she said that I had to get in the wheelchair. Now, I know now, but I didn't know then. And if people don't know, that when you have, especially with major claims, it's an insurance policy. They got to wheel you out. That's just policy of the hospital. I didn't know this, but I can tell you there was nothing more profoundly offensive than to have learned how to walk again and be told, get in this chair. It brought back all of those feelings of a cripple, of being of not important, of being no good, of losing everything again. You talk about a test of faith. I had to get in that wheelchair, and I was furious, just livid. And I'm in the wheelchair, and the only thing I could think to do was to take that book because I was fixing to give her a piece of my mind. So she's wheeling me out, and I'm reading through these quotes. It was a book of quotations. So I was just reading these quotes. We were probably about 100 feet or so from the desk where they were going to let me out. But I came upon this quote. This is another thing that is seared into my brain. I can see this quote on any wall if I look at it. That's how profound this moment was. And this is where the transformation occurred. I read a quote by Winston Churchill. Truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it. Ignorance may deride it. But in the end, there it is. And in that moment, time stopped. In that moment, Harold died. I read that quote. What happened in my mind was truth is incontrovertible. There were two truths at war with each other. One truth was I was dead. I couldn't have survived that accident. I certainly couldn't walk. The other truth was that if I wanted to, at that moment, I could get out of the wheelchair and leave. I had two truths that were at war with each other. And the only thing that came to my mind that had to happen is somebody had to die. I can't explain why that's what came to my mind, other than somebody had to die. I couldn't kill the doctor. They saved my life. Couldn't kill the nurses. They were the ones that were aiding me. Certainly couldn't kill other patients. It wasn't their fault. The only thing I could think of was that I had to get rid of who I used to be. That's what came to my head. Harold had to die. So with that quote, truth is incontrovertible. So there are two truths. Malice may attack it. So the malice attacking the truth of my being able to walk was people assuming that I would never walk again. The malice of some doctors who have no idea what my chart is, no idea what's going on, assuming I'm lying because I said I had 7 broken vertebrae and a damaged spinal cord. They assumed I'm lying because you can't have that and walk. The malice from nurses and other people, same kind of concept. You know, they don't believe it. Ignorance may deride it. The ignorance of people who see someone in a wheelchair to this day is confounding to me. People that are in a wheelchair are no different than you and me. They have just the inability maybe to use their legs, as an example. They are every bit as smart as you and me, smarter. Yeah, I have to believe that there are people out there much smarter than I am. Otherwise, that puts me at the pinnacle of arrogance. So I have to believe that. And I know there are people that are much smarter than me, just like I have to believe there are people that are much better looking than I am, much faster than I am, much better at baseball, you name it. And I also have to believe that I have gifts in areas that I may be the best at in some ways. I have to own that. So the ignorance may deride it. In their ignorance, people made fun of the fact that I was in a halo, made fun of using the cane. And you could hear the snide comments. All the friends that I had, that I look back now, they weren't really my friends. We were just coworkers and thinking that we were, well, not thinking, we were egotistical jerks. But I lost all those egotistical jerks. Nobody wanted a cripple hanging around them. Nobody wanted to deal with that. The only people that remained faithful were my family. And some of my very close friends from back in high school were really hurt to hear that I had this situation. So, you know, the ignorance of people seeing me try to walk with a walker, and here's this obviously young looking man who's got this thing stuck to his head, and the obvious inference is I must have been on drugs, or I must have been, alcoholic, or I must have been shot, or I must have been something. The automatic inference and ignorance of people when they see someone that's not, I'll use the term gifted like they are, able to walk without assistance. That ignorance was overwhelming, and it was stunning. So in their ignorance, they derided my ability to walk. They didn't know the struggle. And then, of course, comes the last part of that quote, which is, but in the end, there it is. And the end result was that no matter what happens, just like what the priest said, what if it's God's will? No matter what, in the end, there it is. It is fact that I can walk. It is also fact that I had 7 broken, crushed subluxed vertebrae and damaged spinal cord. Those two things can and are going together. Nothing's changed. So what happened is I got out of the wheelchair. I didn't say a word to them. I didn't sign anything. To this day, I haven't signed my papers. I got up. I was so empowered by that sudden discovery that I had to kill off Harold. All I could think of was I'm Ray. And I got out of that wheelchair, and I left the hospital, and this gentleman was walking in. He was carrying a little girl. I'm assuming she was between 7 and 8, but she was crying, and he was carrying her in, and I stopped him. And I don't know what possessed me. I stopped him and I said, "Hey, my name is Ray, and I really hope that she's okay." That was really important for me. 2 reasons. Children saved my life. They always thought everything was so cool. And I guess I can give an idea of why I stopped her, because she was crying and sobbing when she came in, and she saw the halo on my head. She stopped crying and kind of her eyes got wide, and I felt drawn, but I went there because I figured out this is good. These children have saved my life. So I went there and I introduced myself. My name is Ray, and I haven't gone by Harold since. I've gone by Ray ever since I walked out. And So I learned from that moment, and I began dedicating my entire being into how can I find joy in any situation?
Yeah.
How
Well,
do you create it?
I gotta tell you that that's a golden nugget there that you talked about, and even with that quote and just the the position you put yourself into, right? Being willing to let go of the past, right? Being willing to kill off that identity to really embrace the new you and the new future. I always tell people, in terms of relationships, and not that I'm a relationship expert, but I always tell people, make sure that the best relationship you can have is make sure you're not cheating on your future with your past, right? So don't cheat on your future with your past. And the fact that, I mean, to me, that right there is golden. That's where we get stuck. We want to hold on to the identity. We want to hold on to the past. We want to hold on to whatever got us here, but sometimes what got us here is not gonna get us there, and you gotta be able to kill that off. And you did that, which is what got you to be who you are now. And talking about that, now you're doing inspirational speaking. You're very resilience, and you have a resilient coaching program. You do study skills training. I want to know about your speaking presentations, the death of Harold, which is what we just went through, right? That whole story. And so that's amazing. So tell me more about what you're doing now, in terms of your professional speaking, inspirational speaking, your books. You have a couple of books. Give me more of that.
Well, the after I left government service for a brief period of time, what I really enjoyed is I had to learn a lot of information when I went through counter intel training. You had to learn a lot of information very, very quickly, and very literally lives depend on your ability to learn all this. I got exposed to some ideas and some theories and some concepts that are really valuable that I thought all students should know. And a lot of that is that, the core of studying, there are three types of ways that studying can be impacted. You have activities you can do that directly impact your ability to study. There are activities you can do that indirectly impact your ability to study. And then there are things you can do that have no impact at all on studying. I mean, there are actions you can take that don't have anything to do with studying, but they improve your grades. So this was the thing that I thought, you know what, I think maybe students might like this. And that's another one of those transformational experiences. What ended up happening in a very short nutshell is I ended up acing a class that was unaceable in one of the colleges by a professor that everyone loathed. And the reason they loathed him was because he was fair. That's why they loathed him. He did not water down his tests, and grades were very specific. You needed this to get that letter. You needed this to get that letter. There was no makeup. There was no extra credit. Learn the material. That's how he was. And so it was consistent that the high grades in classes were, the only thing he did do was at the end, he would then grade on a curve. And then that's how you got your grades. So the A grades were averaging about 70 at the end of the term. And in this particular case, I ended up acing a final exam, which was unheard of. Mm-hmm. And I was accused of cheating. And the professor came to my rescue and my aid, because he said, I witnessed what he did. He had no access to my exam. Specifically, I was accused of having access to the answers and to the exam. And this gentleman wrote his own exams. He did not use the exam bank or the data bank that is common and in use. He wrote his own exams. And so I went and I showed them the study guide that I created. They then asked me if I would teach that at a community education class, which I did. That was picked up by a gentleman named Walter Haley, who was doing these programs for dentists, but they wanted to create a youth program. And he asked me if I would teach study skills at a youth program. It's the one area that they hadn't even thought of. They were teaching young people how to get ahead in life, and communications techniques and things of that nature. But they hadn't even considered the biggest impact that a student goes through, or that a child goes through, between the ages of 10 and 18 is school. So they said, we'll bring in the study skills. So I developed that, and I got really interested in developing that portion. And so I've spent 30 years teaching students of all varieties. It's really effective from 5th grade all the way through, PhD level work. It's really effective, the methods that I teach. So I ended up writing a book called #The Struggle is Real. And that's it. And the struggle, of course, I'm referring to is students trying to get better grades, but no student wants to study. Everybody wants the easy A, so to speak. And so it's a hashtag, the struggle is real, how to turn stressed out students into stress-free scholars. And that's the whole point. You're removing the stress because you're actually learning the material and you're putting into practice some activities that work. And the second book is called hashtag Noob, how to build better students in the video game age. And there's going to be 3 parts to that. So the next book will be hashtag Level Up. And then the third will be hashtag God Mode, all of it based around gaming nomenclature. But it's how do you build better students in a completely new era than you and I grew up in? Because today video games are ubiquitous. I mean, everything is gamified. And so that's and all of that is within the study industry. And so that began my process into speaking, because they wanted me to come in and do the study skills program. And I did that for several years. And during one of those programs, a student asked me about what he saw. He recognized that these aren't dimples. He knew what they were because he had a family member that was in a halo at the time. And so he asked me about that. And so I got very upset because up until that time, I didn't tell anybody about that accident. That's not what propelled me. What was propelling me was teaching kids how to study better. And I got, kind of pretty upset, but I told him, what had happened. And this was at a lunch period. And what ended up happening is he asked me a question, but he was up against a wall and my back was to the lunchroom. So I was telling him, and what I didn't realize is that a huge crowd had formed and they were really interested. And at the end of that particular program that was a week long, Walter called me in and wanted me to explain why the most popular program at that particular boot camp was something that he had never heard of. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And it turns out that the kids had rated that little lunchtime talk with this one guy as the best part of the program. And so that's when I developed the Depth of Herald and began moving into a new direction of the inspirational speaking. And one of the things that is consistent with students and adults alike is that it's difficult to make changes when you have no inspiration behind you. Inspiration can come in many forms, but if you have no need if everyone's telling you you have to change, but you don't see it, all the information in the world is not going to do you any good. And so for me, I thought, there's another place here, and telling that story was very cathartic, but seeing the result that it got led me down another path that if I can combine the two, inspiring students so that, one, they understand that life is a whole lot more than just cracking these books for the next 6 years, and that they can overcome anything. Even if you're 14, you can overcome anything. And I know this intimately because I was only 19.
Yeah.
And so I thought I would put the two together, and that really, really did wonders. That's what prompted me to write the book in the first place, because I realized, and people were always asking me if I had a book about the study skills, and I was always saying, no, I'm good with doing the programs. and so then I wrote the book, and now I'm wanting to branch into mostly on the inspirational side. And I will be real frank, a big part of this is this COVID thing has really caused a great deal of disharmony worldwide.
Right.
And if ever there was a time in our world where inspiration was desperately needed, it's now. And I figure this is a good time to make that shift, to really focus on. I mean, I love to help any student, any school, anybody who wants to know. I'm happy to do that. Where I see the need is on the inspirational side. And stories inspire.
Yeah.
True stories are especially inspirational because we have a human nature. You and I, just like everyone else, when we sit down to listen to somebody, what we're doing when we listen to them is we're putting our problems at the forefront.
Right.
Every one of it, it's human nature. Every one of us does that. And it is our human nature to think, I couldn't do that. I guarantee you've got an incredible story. I don't even have to know you. I don't even have to meet you to know you've got an incredible story. Everybody does. Are they willing to tap into it? What's your incredible story? And how can you move forward with that? And that's what I'd like to awaken in people is you've got an incredible story. Now use that and move forward.
Yeah, wow. I got to tell you that is some words of wisdom and a lot of great information. So if people wanted to connect with you, how can they get a hold of you?
The best way for email is ray@truestudyskills.com. And that's the easiest, most consistent way, because I'll get that till cows come home. And I have no problem with people texting or calling if they'd like to. And that number is 210-692-4141.
All right, awesome. Ray, so one thing that comes to mind, and this is really I think is really going to resonate, and you've given us a lot of great lessons through your story. What is one thing that, or a couple of things that you are doing now, or you continue to do to really put you in that positive state of mind? Because one of the things that you want to leave the listeners with is that joy is everywhere, right? And so if joy is everywhere, what are some of the things that you do to really keep you in that state of mind in pushing forward and moving forward?
I'll give you a great big one that I encourage everyone to try just for a week, because it will change your life. It's remarkable. Another aspect of human behavior that is totally normal is the incredible ability to get worried about something that hasn't happened yet in advance. If you flip that on its head, now people that do that are called wise. They're preparing. I don't agree with that, but that is what's told when somebody's worried about something in the future that hasn't happened, and they worry about it in advance. That's called being wise, because you're preparing. And I don't think that that's accurate, but that's the label culturally we've given it. But if you flip it on its head, if I were to say to you, I'm getting really excited about X that hasn't happened yet, but I'm celebrating the victory, people think you're nuts. You're called a dreamer. You're called your head's in the clouds. But inside your head, mentally, and the neurons that are transmitted in your brain are identical. It's exactly the same process to worry about something that hasn't happened as it is to get joyful about something that hasn't happened. So for just 1 week, just a week, what I do consistently, and I do this daily now, and it's become a habit that sometimes people laugh at, but that's part of the problem, or part of the joy is they laugh. I know it's made an impact. Because by laughing, that releases different endorphins that causes you to breathe a little easier, causes your head to clear a little more, and it causes the smile. But what I do is I literally take a look at what's the best thing that could possibly happen today, and then I begin celebrating it, even if it hasn't happened. Now, in other circles, and maybe in different books, different seminars, or different speakers might tell you that that this is kind of the same concept as if you focus on what you want, then you tend to get it. So if you're driving a car and you focus on a light pole, if you start to skid, don't focus on the light pole, focus on the road, so that you can help it. And I would like to look at this as I don't use this as a thing to do when I'm in trouble or when I'm in panic mode. I look at this as the start of my day. This is how I begin my day. My focus is, okay, what's the best thing that could happen? And then I celebrate it. Now, I get the question on occasion, well, what happens if it doesn't happen? And it's, oh, I was so close. And yes, that is literally what I do. Oh, I was so close. It doesn't prevent me from the very next day thinking of what's the best thing that could happen and celebrating in advance. Because if you worry about something that didn't happen, then you get all sense of relief. I would much rather have that sense, oh, almost, because that builds excitement, that builds hope, and that keeps you on that focus going forward. But when you're constantly worrying about something that hasn't happened and then it doesn't happen, and then you're like, whew, I dodged a bullet. No, you didn't. You didn't dodge anything. It just didn't happen. Yeah. That's life. That's how it is. So that would be my suggestion. Number one goal is flip it on its side for just a week.
Yeah.
Just take everything instead of the worry mode, flip it on its head. What's the best thing that could happen in that scenario, and begin celebrating it.
Yeah. No, I love that, Ray. Well, Ray, I gotta say, I had a really good time with you today. So thank you so much for everything you've shared with us today. Is there anything else that you want to leave before we let you go?
That's it. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for inviting me in. I had a great time, and I hope that anyone listening has a magnificent week.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much. And for the rest of you guys, please make sure that you connect with Ray. Check us out at your favorite podcast platform and stay tuned for the next episode so You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. Have a good day. Bye.
Hi, I'm CesarRespino, real estate investor, business coach, and consultant, and author of the book, You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No. My number is 424-501-6046. In my book, I talk about making the necessary changes to shift your mind for prosperity and certainty. Pick up your copy at Amazon. I also love helping families with their real estate and can purchase your house fast and all cash. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. My number is 424-501-6046.
Thank you for having me today. I am so glad you've tuned into this podcast. You can find me at your favorite podcast platform where you can like, subscribe, comment, and share. And to learn more about myself, my services, you can find me at www.CesarRespino.com, or you can also find me at your social media. Thanks for joining me, and I am looking forward to having you at the next episode. And know you truly can overcome anything.